whatever confessions that has brought me here, whatever evidence that has made it possible for me to be in this courtroom was not gotten out of me fairly. Hello and welcome back. My name is Wanga and I'll be your host. As we contemplate the country we want for ourselves, we must have a conversation about police reforms. Police is the institution that guarantees the society we live in today. When we call ourselves a modern society or an organized society, what it means is that we as a people have agreed to live by a certain set of rules. And these rules need to be enforced for our collective benefit. And the police are the institution that are charged with that duty. But what happens if this institution is corrupted? What happens if the people who are meant to ensure a society of equals decide to use their efforts and their powers to protect the interest of a few at the cost of the rest of us? It is my belief that any discussion about the future country we want to have or we can have is futile if it does not involve a discussion about us having ourselves a new police force. And it is very important to note that I said a new police force. I am not here to make a case for reforming the police. Our Kenya Police Service, as currently constituted, is beyond reform. The institution is rotten and cannot be reformed. If we want to have ourselves a better country, we must deliberate on ways we can give ourselves a new police service. This is the only way we will ensure that we have a country that is able to cater to all our needs and help us achieve that country we want. Before we get ahead of ourselves, some context. In 1953, there was a man called General Bobby Eskin. I don't know whether I am pronouncing that correctly, but I'm not English. When the Mau Mau War began in 1952, the administration had underestimated the capabilities of the rebellion. But the British, given they were still in charge, but the British, given that they were still in charge, decided to take matters into their own hands. Winston Churchill sent General Bobby into Kenya to come and take control of the situation. And the general had one trick up his sleeve. He had the authority to declare martial law, which would have meant that he had the authority with him to suspend the civil administration. And this gave him a unique perspective and a unique power because his negotiating ability with either the colonial administration or with the settlers was different because there is nothing they could do to him, but he could actually alter their reality. Getting here, and after interacting with the settlers, he viewed them as people who were very entitled, people who looked down upon the people they shared a country with, just an entitled group. In a letter to his wife, it was his belief that Kenya's problem were because of a rotten administration. In a letter to his wife, he told her that these people need some decent police, and in a letter to his wife, he noted that this country only needed a decent civil service and some decent police. It has been 73 years since 1953, and it is my submission that 73 years later, our challenges still remain the same. We are a country that still runs depending on a very inefficient or an incompetent police service and a rotten civil service. The police institution, as we understand it today, was a creation of a man called Robert Peel in 1829. The first policing institution was the London Metropolitan Police, and it had very simple and direct obligations or duties. They were supposed to ensure protection law enforcement, civilian protection. They were supposed to be derived from the people. They were representative of the places where they lived, and they derived their power from the consent of the people they dealt with. They were also supposed to be neutral actors. The police were not supposed to engage in partial administration of justice. And lastly, they were supposed to be a centralized force. It had to be organized from a central place. This model informed what we know the police as police institutions in the world. Of particular importance to us is the iteration that was taken up by the Americans. At the same time when the police were being policing became an institution at the height of slavery in the West. And in the United States, there were cases of slaves running away from their masters. So the Americans took the policing idea and modeled it into what they called slave patrols. Slave patrols were white men who had to go around chasing slaves who had run from their owners so that they could be taken back. It is this model that was institutionalized in a lot of colonies for either the British, the French, the European countries. The slave patrol model that was used in America is what was transferred to us as part of the policing institution. Now, Kenya was declared a protectorate in 1895. And the first police unit that we got was recruited from the British East India Company. And this is where the DNA of our police was corrupted. You see, the men who had served as guards for the colonial entity, the British East India Company, had been recruited not from us, they had been recruited from other countries. They carried guns. In Peel's initial imagination of the police were never supposed to carry guns. They were not a military force, they were a civilian entity. The only tools they were allowed to carry were truncheons, or the rungu that we see with our police officers. The first policing unit, having been recruited from a colonial entity, carried the mentality of service into policing. These were men who were brought here to help with the extraction of labor. They were here to help with forced labor for either settlers and the making of the railway. They were also here to enforce pass laws which prohibited the movement of Africans and protect the lives and property of settlers. But this was a deviation from what was meant to serve as a policing entity. Fast forward, and we get to 1952. The emergency years, I believe, were the most informative of the state we have today. The state of emergency was the period in which the Kenyan state as we know it today was defined. And how did this happen? When the declaration of a state of emergency happened, there was an understanding that there were not enough security forces to help repel a rebellion in the colony. Prior to that, it was easier to maintain the colony with a few police officers because rebellions were sporadic. But the Mau Mau was not a sporadic rebellion. It was an entire community, the largest community in the country, and they occupied the heartland of the country. And so in their anger, because the British viewed the rebellion by the Mau Mau as an insult to them, they did not understand how these people they had brought civilization to could dare say that what was brought to them was not enough, that they wanted more. And so they reacted in anger. Police powers were expanded. More police were recruited. And it was here that the infrastructure that lay the foundation of our security system, the Kenya Police, how the Kenya Police have the branches, the special branch, all of those This was the time that that imagination came into being. And the thing about the period was the people in charge. The British maintained a regiment of, it was called the Kenya Regiment, a regiment of settlers who were part of the British military. But after the declaration of the emergency, first they recruited 600 temporary police officers from Britain, and then they went into the colony and recruited the settlers into the Kenya Police Reserve. The Kenya Police Reserve was made up of roughly 6 to 7,000 white settlers. The issue is not the settlers, it is the attitude that the settlers brought with them. For context, I want us to understand the type of settlers we got. We got two particular types of settlers. The first group came from Britain, and they were mostly either relatives or children of the higher class in Britain. But because society was changing, the benefits that that status had conferred to the ancestors was no longer available to them. So when they came to Kenya, which they called Happy Valley, they wanted to replicate what they had lost at home. The second group of settlers we got were poor white South Africans. Now, these were problematic because they had already lived with black people. They already had very backward view about what we represented as a people. And it was a combination of these people that formed the Kenya Police Reserve. In 1954, or even in 1953, General Bobby was forced to come out after claims of brutality became too prevalent. He came out to try and to stop the culture. And in the reports that were produced during that period, the General Service Unit, the Kenya Police Reserves, the Kenya Regiment, and the Kikuyu Guard, what we call the Home Guard, were singled out as people who had gone over and above their way to meet brutality on the people. This historical context is important in order to understand how our police came to be formed. You see, there was a culture in our country. White people were the superior class. Africans and Asians were only allowed to interact with the superior class as servants or as people who were either taking instructions or taking directions. The Indians, by virtue of being Asians, became the mid-tier class. And then there was us, the Africans. So from the get-go, any African who served in the security forces was made to understand that they did not have a mandate over the white settlers. They did not have a mandate over the Indians. They only had a mandate over us, the Africans. But it did not stop there. The police, any white police officer automatically took charge of any black officer around him. This meant that they could command these officers to engage in whatever activity they want because they were the senior officers. But these were hateful people. They not only hated us, but they hated our guts, and they wanted to prove that we were inferior. There was something wrong. There was something wrong with us. And while today this may not make sense, in the 1950s, the world did not believe in the equality of human beings. Africans were still viewed as an underclass. So in that world, it was okay. The attitude of white people looking down upon black people was normal. But now there were angry settlers who had a bone to pick because they came to believe that every African around them wanted them dead because of some of the activities that the Mau Mau had engaged in. It was these men that laid the foundation of what became the Kenya Police Service. These men who were hateful against us, these men who did not view us as human beings, these men who thought that we were undeserving, that we were not subjects of the law, we were not when the laws of the land protected people, it did not mean us. It meant the settlers and to some extent the Indians. In the hunt for the Mau Mau, initially there was a task force by the special branch. They had a very simple role. They would go into the forest, capture guerrillas, the Mau Mau, and then take them to court. They would be judged. If you are Mau Mau by then, it was an automatic hanging sentence. But over time, they modified the service. When they captured guerrillas, because it was already understood that if you are captured, you are going to be hanged, it was very easy to convince these guerrillas to turn on their brothers. So they would come, be turned, and then they would help the police to go and hunt their brothers in the forest. Instructions was simple when the activity started. Go capture who you can capture, kill those who are a threat to you or those who are running. But a challenge arose. Everyone who was captured had to be taken to trial, and the police did not view that as part of their obligation. They did not want to engage in the activity of having to prove wrongdoing. And with such an attitude, the mandate was changed. Every guerrilla that was captured afterward was terminated on the spot. That culture, that culture where criminals are arrested and detained and brutalized and killed without being presented to court, that culture gained a footing during that period. At the same time, because the police service is growing and now the colonialists can no longer pretend that they do not need to police the Africans, they needed more recruits. But the people who are recruiting the people recruiting men into the police service were the same settlers who were brutalizing who were brutalizing our ancestors. And they had one simple qualification for people who wanted to serve in the police service. You had to prove your loyalty to the people who you would be working with. And there is this concept called adverse selection, where the worst of a group are taken and then put into a single lot because they share a particular ideal or they share a particular behavior. Most of the men who had served in the home guard were communal pariahs. They were men who, at the time of the emergency, decided that their lot was better served by standing with the colonialists against their brothers and sisters. And because loyalty could only be measured by how brutal or how much you could inflict pain or you could brutalize and kill your brothers and sisters, the people who rose to the top, the people who were the first recruit of this new service, were mostly men who carried those attitudes. It is said in our discourse that we never fought for freedom. It was granted to us. One of the things that comes with that historical, it's a historical inaccuracy, but it does make sense. One of the things that came with that was that the British got to manage our transition into an independent country, which meant that the British got to recruit people who were going to replace them into the government before they left. And the British now by then the British had attitudes against different Africans and they trusted only one particular group of Africans, the ones who had helped them brutalize and maim our people during the emergency. It was these people that were recruited into the service. It have been these people who have laid the infrastructure. It has been these people who, through their actions and through their preferences, have allowed the police to morph into what it is today. Another interesting development that happened during the same period was the expansion of what was considered illegal at the time. So in an ability to expand the net to be able to capture more people and be able to interrogate more people, the reasons for detaining people were expanded. The police could just arrest you for anything. But we must remember, the only people that black police had jurisdiction over were the Africans. And these police were neither paid, they were not paid well, They were just lowlives who had decided to stand with the colonialists against their people. These police officers began a culture. By then, they were not police officers. By then, they were mostly home guards. But they began a culture where they could arrest you. And if you were found guilty, and if you were found innocent of the primary crime for which you are being questioned, they could make up crimes that then they could use to present you to court. But it did not stop there. Because at the beginning of the emergency, the people who went to court had been beaten up and brutalized. They usually told the judges that whatever confessions that has brought me here, whatever evidence that has made it possible for me to be in this courtroom, was not gotten out of me fairly. I was beaten, I was harmed, and I was forced to sign things I did not agree with. And these cases became a concern because the British were still pretending that they were here to help us become a civilized society. And they came up with a very simple solution. A police officer, and here by a police officer, I mean a white police officer. A white police officer could attest to a testimony that had been withdrawn by a black suspect, and the judge would side with the police officer. What do I mean by this? A person would be arrested and beaten up because as they tried to understand whether they were Mau Mau or not. And after being beaten up, some people would agree to whatever was written in a paper and sign it. When presented to court and those people are made to understand what they signed meant, now these people would retract because now they were in front of a judge and they had been made to understand that a court is the place where you go to get justice. But with the law that allowed the police to attest witness testimony, even if there was a retraction, a police officer could just say that, no, this is not what happened, my version is more accurate. And it did not matter whether the black person presented 20 people who could disprove what the police had said. The judges sided with the police. And with that, a culture was born. If a police officer arrested you and then found out that they could not charge you with whatever they wanted to charge you with, they could make up fictitious charges and then present you to court, and either you'd go to prison or to detention. But over and above that, it provided the police with an avenue where if they were harassing, they met you on the road and they decided to harass you for money or for items. If you refused, they had the option of making up charges because they knew that all they had to do was make up charges, and then a police officer, a white person who was in charge of them. And again, these were not officers. These were settlers who had been recruited into the police to help manage the rebellion. So now the police had the power to make up fictitious charges if you refuse to be exploited. This is the foundation on which our police, as we now look at them, this is the foundation that they were founded upon. Now, I know a lot of these things are historical facts, and one would be okay to make the argument that it is 2026, not 1963. These realities have been passed by time, and that would sound logical. But as I have already stated, the people who managed that period not only recruited people who they agreed with, and by the people they agreed with, it were the people who sided with them. But those people now became the vanguards of these institutions. Those people became the determinants of people, of understanding who can join the police, who can be promoted. And it was the same policy. Those who could brutalize the Africans most, those who had little regard for the common person, for some reason, was able to find room in the police and they could serve out there. Now, how does what I have just said apply to us today? Our police are only interested in protecting the ruling class. That is their DNA. They were here to protect the colonial administration and protect the lives and property of the white settlers. That is what they are still doing. This is why, regardless of who is in government, whether it is the colonialist, whether it is the colonialists or Kenyatta 1, Moi, Kibaki, Kenyatta 2, Ruto, the behavior of the police does not change. The police serve the people in charge of the country. This is why the police, and the saddest part is, the police serve the people in charge. But the contract upon which the police derive their power, we the governed, the contract on which the police are able to use their guns, they are able to arrest you, that contract of law enforcement does not allow them to choose who to serve or who not to serve. It does not allow them to cherry pick who deserves justice and who does not. But that is how our police work. If today you are in a legal confrontation with a person who is more endowed than you in terms of resources, the more likely person to come out with a better outcome or a more favorable outcome to them is that person who has the money. It is not abnormal for normal Kenyans to go to the police, report a case, and by the time they get to the gate of the police station, the officer who they had just communicated with has called the person you just accused of a crime, telling them of how they are aware of a situation that needs to be sorted and how they are in a position to help them make the problem go away. Because that is how our police operate. Our police serve the people who have money because, again, we were a society formed on hierarchy. Whites, Indians, Africans. White and Indians, police were made to understand from the get-go they could not touch. The whites and Indians in our society still make up what we call the upper class of this society. But now we are a country of Africans, and Africans are in charge. And the only iteration that our governments have made since we became an independent nation is that they have included themselves and any moneyed African in that echelon of the special class, the upper class. And so for the police understand something. They are here to serve Bwana Mkubwa. And so now, and Bwana Mkubwa is any person who's white. Bwana Mkubwa is Asians. Now, I have just used Asians because initially we had Indians alone, but we have a new colonialist in town, and he also gets the same rights as his neighbors in India. If over and above the police protecting those people they consider the superior class, our police also engage in laxity when dealing with normal Kenyans. If you want to understand the interaction that we have with the police, if you want to understand the challenges we have with policing in our society, you need to look no further than with regards to how the police interact with us, the normal Kenyans. When we seek services from the police, most of the time we are required to pay to be able to get services that we are all entitled to. But over and above that, even when you pay for those services, it is not a guarantee that you are going to be served. In this country, when you are poor and you break the law, or if you are poor and something happens to you that the law needs to protect you from, the police conduct themselves with so much laxity that by the time justice is supposed to be happening, your justice has already been denied because it has been delayed for too long. And this victimizes both the accused and the people and the victims. The accused are forced to rot in remand because a trial that would have taken 2 months takes 3 years. The people who are the victims are forced to halt their lives and have to keep appearing in courts that we are going to be adjourned And their lives are completely transformed simply because they were harmed and they sought justice. But it does not end there. Most of the time, when members of the society complain that crime has become rampant, we must understand that it does not mean that crime started that day. If there are robberies in your place, by the time it is known that in your place there are robberies, it is because all of you have been robbed so much that you can no longer live with it. So every time a crime pops out, or every time crimes make themselves visible, it is because the society around has had to deal with that challenge for quite some time. And by the time the police come in, they cannot offer justice. Because, in my view, justice is supposed to be restorative. The most fair system is the system that restores people to where they were before harm came to them. But if you're going to solve a problem long after it has established itself, you do not have the leeway or the room to be able to absorb or help people deal with the challenges that incompetence brings. But that is not all. I think the I think the element that makes our police so rotten, that makes our police an entity that we cannot carry into the future as they are currently constituted, is their attitudes towards criminality. Every crime in this country that happens, there is almost an assurity that there is a police officer somewhere who is aware of that crime. And that is not our only challenge. It is, you see, police officers exist to solve crimes. But when crimes happen with the consent of the police, then people do not have a place to go and get reprieve. And this is compounded because sometimes even the police themselves are involved in the crime. And when you go to report a crime to a police station where the police officer is the offender, the initial reaction of the police is to try and protect their person, is to come together. It does not matter who you report to. The first reaction is to try and cover up the crime and ensure that their colleague is not held to account. But how are you a law enforcement institution if even in your own building, even within the entity, there are crimes that are being committed? You cannot solve crimes if you are the person doing the crime. And that is what our challenge with the police is. It is not that they are not made to serve us, but it is that they are partakers in the criminality we face in our society. And with such attitudes, we do not have a way to ensure that our police ever get to serve us. Now, it is in June, so very soon we are going to have a commemoration of the brutality that the young men and women faced in the last 2-3 years. But how are we going to get justice if the people who are supposed to give us justice are the same people who offended us in the first place? We have a choice as a group, as a generation, as a country. We can give ourselves a new police force. A police force that does not salute thieves while killing young men because they stole a phone. A police force that does not help people who are looting this country continue to escape justice while continuing to harass the innocent Kenyans because of doing legitimate business. We cannot live in a country like that, where justice is something that is served to the highest bidder, where there are 2 tiers of justice systems, where there is a justice system for the rich and a justice system for the rest of us. This is our country. And if we want this country to work for us, The institutions that make this country function must work to serve us. And there is no greater institution that is required to serve us than the police. And so, yes, do we want change? Yes. Do we want a new country? Yes. But all of that is futile if we do not have a responsible and a responsive police service. I was not here to bash the police. I understand that there are challenges that the police undergo, and I know that some of these challenges make it difficult for them to do their job. But their oath requires them to help to maintain law and order. It is not maintain law and order once you are satisfied or once your needs are met. When they decide to exercise the power of the police is only exercised by people who enforce the law. So if you're not enforcing the law, you cannot give yourselves the power of the police. And that is our challenge. We have a group of men and women who exist to serve the interest of a very few of us, but they use power that we have. They use an institution and power that we have ceded to a group that is only meant to serve us. And so because this group has decided they do not want to serve us, this group does not get to exercise that power. We are a country of 55 million people. We need 150,000 police officers. Yes. We are a country we need 150,000 police officers. So if it requires the current crop to go and we bring in a new one, I think that is what we ought to do.